Hey everybody, it's Dan Alatorre, USA Today best-selling author, coming to you live today on TikTok. And we're going to special treat for you. We're going to be talking with J.C. Fuller, who is a fellow author. And today's goal is going to be to do a simultaneous live session. So I'm going to be live here. She's going to be live on hers. We're going to link up, and then you can ask whatever questions you might have for either one of us. And while we're getting that underway, I'm going to make a quick note here. TikTok will send out the invitation to her. And I want you to feel free to join us and ask any questions you'd like. There's JC. So JC, you should be live on your channel now, right? And then we'll get an invite to join. So as soon as we see that JC is live over there, TikTok will send us the invitation. Looks like that's it right there. Let's see. Nope, I don't see you yet. I'm gonna have to let that sit for a second. So we're waiting for JC Fuller to go live on hers. No, JC, you need to go live on yours, and then it'll send me the invite. That's how we've done it before. I don't know how you guys did it. So just instead of joining my call, what you want to do is end your call, go in, hit the camera button, scroll to the right, it'll say live, click that, and then you'll be live on yours, I'll be live on mine, and we can, and then I'll get an automatic invitation to invite you to my call. So just hang tight for a second. It should work. Hopefully it'll work. And we're gonna get JC Fuller over here live for us. Just a sec. Takes a minute. You understand technology. So she's going to be joining us, and then we're going to have a chat with her. She's a mystery author. And she's there. She goes. So now we're going to. This must be a little different from how you did it last time. Huh?
Yeah, I've actually never done the hosting. I've always joined in on the other person hosting. So anyway, good morning. Or good afternoon morning. For you.
Yeah, well, it's afternoon now, so I'm in Tampa, Florida, and you're out in Washington State, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah, Eastern Washington. So
Eastern Washington, so even
the dry side of the state. Yeah,
well, I was going to say,
it's raining today, but yeah.
Yeah, your neck of the woods is well, Washington State is known for being a very wet, rainy place. So you've done a couple of live sessions here on TikTok. The prior ones you did, you were probably friends with the person and they just automatically invited you.
Yes.
And I guess that could have worked. How I've always done it is we both go live at the same time and then we get linked. And maybe one's better than the other. But right now, people who follow you or who you pop up on their For You page, they'll see your feed and they can ask you questions, and that won't show up on my screen. And conversely, my people will see me, like Serpent Bookie just joined in. Good morning. And that's her call handle. I always feel a little strange calling her Serpent Bookie, but privacy is fine. We let people be called whatever they want, and then so my people can see me. Now it's worth mentioning, if somebody sees my screen and they'd rather follow your screen, they just tap and they'll say, "Do you want to switch over to JC Fuller's screen?" And then they'll be watching your feed. Either way, we're both on the same page at the same time, and that's cool. Really the key.
So this works.
So this is everybody who's watching me. Thanks a lot for joining us. This is JC Fuller. She's a mystery writer of novels. Got a couple of them out, and we'll talk about that in a second. And as we just mentioned, she's coming to us all the way from Washington State in the great U.S. of A. So welcome. Glad you could coordinate this with us.
Yes, thank you for taking the time to let me join your conversation. I thoroughly enjoy your lives. As you know, I creep in on your lives all the time, and then I pester you with all sorts of questions. And I just find your advice so timely and important and knowledgeable and so extremely helpful. So I'm kind of excited. I'm kind of fangirling right now, Dan.
I was going to say, all that flattery is probably why I invited you to join me. So here's what today's plan is. Anybody who's watching you can ask you questions. They'll pop up on the bottom of your screen. Anybody who's watching me, feel free to ask questions to me or JC. By the way, that's your handle, is that what you want me to refer to you as JC?
Yeah, JC is fine. Yeah,
Okay, and you
it's
can
taken
just
me
call me.
a little bit to get used to because it's obviously not my name. So I'm always like JC, and I'm like, oh, that's me. Yeah, so that's fine.
Well, if anybody asks for JC, we'll know it's probably not me they're looking for. So,
Right.
so my goal today was to kind of get to know a little bit about the personality behind the page. So, a lot of times when authors do a podcast or they do a TikTok live, they get on and they just tell people how to write a book, and that's interesting. And there's certainly a time and place for that. Mm-hmm. But I thought that's kind of a one channel kind of thing, and we're multidimensional people. And so, what I'd like to do is ask some questions. Feel free to ask me any questions.
Oh, I got a list.
Get to know each other a little bit. Now, when you were talking about how I would do a TikTok live, and you certainly weren't pestering me, part of the fun of doing a live broadcast, so to speak, is that people can come in and ask anything. And your questions, because you're a fellow author, your questions tended to be a little more about how process type stuff, mm-hmm. which is interesting sometimes for readers. Like, how do you do such and such? What's that process like? Because they don't know. They go to the library, pick a book, or they click a link on Amazon and buy a book and they read. And so I always figured it's interesting. I know I was always interested. Authors, actors, directors, historical figures, to know a little bit about them behind the scenes, like that type of stuff. So hopefully that is what we can accomplish today. So you got some people joining you over there. I keep seeing you wave.
Everybody's saying hi. I got Snippy Willie and Mama Mouse on there and all sorts of fun people.
So if you want, tell us a little bit about you're on TikTok a lot. You write books. What is your non-TikTok life, if you want to share a little of that?
Yeah. So, I have a full-time job. I work in customer service. I work with a big plastic company. So that's fun, but it's a good job. I love it. Really good company. But of course, my heart's in writing. And we have a family farm out here in Washington. It's been in the family for 150 years.
Really? What kind of stuff happens on the farm? Is it produce type stuff, or
so it's alfalfa and cattle. And growing up on the farm, really, our closest neighbor is like 5 miles away. So as a kid, it was just me and my sister, and so it really, I had nothing but my imagination, and then my poor little sister. It's about 144 acres.
So how much of that is cattle and how much is alfalfa?
Most of it, I'd say 75% alfalfa and 25% cattle.
Really? Oh, yeah. So not that big of a giant herd. What do you got? Like
no.
100 head?
Yeah. Yep. About. Yeah. And right now, actually, my grandfather ended up having 4 daughters who all became school teachers, and no one became farmers. So we actually lease out the property to a young farmer that does it, but it's still our land. But yeah, so he's got stacks of alfalfa, which is, I think, the best smell in the whole entire world. If you like the smell of cut grass, you'll love the smell of cut alfalfa. It's the best.
I was just going to ask. I don't know that much about alfalfa. I know it's like a hay-like, grass-like product. Mm-hmm. But is that mostly used for commercial feeds and stuff?
Yep. So what they do, it's this beautiful green, tall. It grows tall. It has a beautiful purple bloom to it. And they cut that. They let it dry out, and then they stack it up into a haystack. And that's what you feed the cattle in the wintertime when nothing green's around.
So that's how you got into, that's how you grew up. How did you get into being an author?
Well, so I always was one of those kids that had an imagination, and I would write and write and write and write. But I never brought anything to completion. I'd get halfway. I was a pantser, which there's nothing wrong with being a pantser, but I ended up realizing I had to be an outliner. I have to figure it out. So I would write, and my English teachers, who, Lord love them, they would, ask for a 500-word essay, and I would write like 1,500 words, and luckily I always got, I didn't get yelled at for, not following the assignment. And then as I got to be an adult, I joined Facebook, and I would write these cute little stories on my Facebook, just to try to entertain my friends and family. And they started to encourage me, like, you need to write a book. You need to write a book. And I was like, and after a couple of years of Facebook stories, and people started to get kind of persistent about it, that I was like, maybe I will, So I sat down and I had this little idea, which was Black Bear Alibi, and I wrote it out. And being the pantser that I was at the time, I got halfway through and I kind of gave up because I couldn't figure out what I was doing, kind of lost interest. And my father, who unfortunately is no longer with us, he was reading along the way. And when he got to where I'd given up, he was like, where's the rest of the story? And I was like, oh, I'm just not feeling it anymore, Dad. And then imposter syndrome sinks in. So I was like, what am I doing? I don't. And he said to me, this has stuck with me, and he said, you have a sheriff in her yellow slicker standing in the rain, tapping her foot, wanting to know what is the rest of her story. And Dan, that hit me in my core. I felt so guilt-ridden towards my characters and that I didn't finish the story that I sat my butt down. I finished, I did an outline, came up with the rest of the steps, and I finished the darn thing.
Good.
And and then it kind of was like I had created this little world with these characters that I love. And then I wanted to do a second one and then a third. And, we just took off from there.
It's amazing that your story is very similar to mine. So I wouldn't say I was always writing like as a kid and stuff, but when I look back on it, I did do a lot of that. I wrote a lot of little adventure stories that nobody ever saw but me, right?
Right.
And I was on Facebook, and we had our daughter had just been born. Actually, I started a little before that, but where it became like storytelling was once she was born, she and I would go do something. It didn't matter what it was, bald little baby being carried around by her dad. Everybody thinks is a boy. It didn't matter that she was dressed in pink from head to toe with a bow on her head. She didn't have any hair yet, and it took she, little peach fuzz, and she looked great, but her hair never really grew long for like that first year. It just didn't have the long hair, girlish kind of look. And like I said, it didn't matter. I dressed her in pink from head to toe. So I'd go to Home Depot or whatever, and oh, your son is so cute. I'm like, yeah, it's my daughter. But so I would write just these little snippets, and as she got older, she would talk and we'd do things. And so she was wearing her Cinderella dress, and I had to go run an errand. And she's like, "Well, come with me because it's just you and me. I can't leave you at the house, and I got to run the errand." So I would take her everywhere, and I thought that was good for her to get out. And so sure enough, there's me and the little princess walking through Home Depot, and everybody's saying hi to her. So those little things, which any parent will tell you, there's a million cute, amazing, funny little things that happen with a kid, and they're just here and gone, and we're busy, so don't write them down or anything. So each night I would just write them down. Or if she had to wake up in the middle of the night for a feeding, then a lot of times I would take care of that, and I wouldn't be able to fall back to sleep. So I would write about the funny thing we did at the mall or whatever, and I'd post them on Facebook. So in those days, my job didn't start till about noon. I was in wine sales. So I'd be up. If she woke up at 2, I'd probably fall asleep again around 4, right? After taking her for like 10 minutes, 5 minutes. So I would sit up and write. And then when I got tired, I'd crash out on the couch. My wife would wake up. I'd go to bed. And then, so I'd post my little story on Facebook. And then when I would come home from work, there'd be like 100 comments from all my wife's friends and my friends about what a great story. And that's when everybody was like, you should write a book. You should write a book. And I had the same reaction as you. I'm like, no, these are cute. They're great Facebook posts. I'm glad you enjoy them, but no. And then a friend challenged me. They're like, there's those little things you write, they have a beginning, a middle, and an end. They have a sequence of events. They have a plot. There's drama. How is this going to end? And in a book is just that. Lots of those, and under one big umbrella of a topic. And I said, okay, I'll give it a shot. And I learned a little bit about writing and cranked one out, and I was very, very happy with how it did. And of course, there was in between the first novel and the little Facebook stories, there was a few bumps along the way, but very, very similar story to yours.
Yeah. Now, how many years have you been writing? Because you have quite the catalog. I mean, I managed with 3 little books in 4 years, and I mean, you have a plethora of books in all different styles as well. It's not just one genre. Right?
So when I first started out, since I was writing about my daughter, I thought, well, we'll write the book about that. And it was just kind of a collection of anecdotes. And it didn't really, it had kind of a theme. And since I'd been doing it for a couple of years, I had a lot of them, so I could put out a couple of books. One book basically when she was between 1 and being born and being 2 years old, to kind of span that time frame, and then 2 to 3, and then like that. And as I was doing that, that was when my friends were like, you should write novels and stuff. So I looked into doing that and I did that. So so it's like, when did you start writing? Well, when I was about 5 or 6, but I started, my first novel was probably 4 or 5 years ago. And in a lot of the stuff I wrote, so when my daughter was in school and she was like in first grade, she and I wrote some books together that were basically illustrated books, 600 word, because at the time that's what they read, and they're 600 word long. Which so for our viewing audience, a novel is like 65,000 words. So these little starter early reader books are like 600 words. Big difference, with lots of pictures, like a picture
Right.
on every page, and a lot of repetition of like, then Jane went to the store, then Jane went to the whatever, right? There's a lot of repetition of words so the kids can learn the words and that kind of thing. That's what they're designed for first graders. So we wrote 3 or 4 of those. It was the Zombunny series, and she came up with the character. And so we wrote stories together about that. And then she had some other stories that she was interested in. I helped her write. I mean, she would tell me the story, and I'd kind of write it down, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I did some cookbooks. I did a lot of family humor stuff, and I wrote a romance. And my goal was, let me try everything, because I always believed a good story has layers. Like, just say a good Western, okay? Take the old movie Dances with Wolves. It's basically a romance, you know? It's certainly adventure between the warring tribes of the Native Americans who are attacking the tribe that he became friendly with. And it's kind of a Western and all that. But it's also, sorry, my computer zapped out on me. It's also a bit romance story. And Star Wars, the original Star Wars in the 70s, was kind of the same way. It's a big space adventure, but there's romance. And I thought, the stories that I really enjoy, which a lot of people seem to enjoy, have this fast pace. They have a romantic subplot. They have really fun characters that I want to spend time with. And so I thought, I will write stories that are that way. And that's kind of how I started out with my first novel. A couple of cops who are best friends, a man and a woman, they're best friends. And I thought, wouldn't it be great to work with your best friend and go on this adventure of they're cops. So they're going to have an adventure. They have to chase down a serial killer who, halfway through the book, you find out he's decided he's going to make them go away. And now he's pursuing them. Chases the female is Carly Sanderson. She goes jogging. So he waits for her and he chases her while she's out jogging, because you're a woman, you're alone, it's dark, and there's somebody chasing you. So I'm like, what are the like universal kind of themes? And it's different. He mostly pursues her because she gave a presentation that he watched, but his goal is, I'm going to get rid of both of them, kind of thing. And that's how I started into it.
Yeah. Now, do you enjoy writing mystery more than you do romance or horror? Or like, are you kind of like, you write mystery for a little while and then you get bored? Maybe you're not bored, but you want to do something a little bit different.
I think you have to recharge the batteries. When you finish writing one of your mysteries, don't you feel like, okay, I spent however many months with these people, with this tension and this plot. I need to, cleanse the palate and recharge the batteries.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what I would do when I was done writing a mystery novel, I would usually some kind of a break of a week, or more than a week, a couple of weeks, or maybe sometimes a couple months. And I would write horror stories, short horror stories, because they still get a lot of the same elements of keeping you on the edge of your seat. You want a fast pace. What is causing the tension is a monster versus a killer, but isn't a killer kind of a monster, And again, personalities that the reader's going to want to spend time with. And sometimes part of the mystery is getting to know some of these different characters. And sometimes the mystery is, I started one of my favorite short stories is called Fate and Moonlight. And it's basically, not to spoil it, but it's about a kid who's descended from a line of werewolves. And it's kind of like what I like about writing short stories is you set up this premise and the people are going along as your willing accomplices, the readers. And then you get to the end and you find out everything I thought was wrong. So I kind of ruined that story because you're thinking his mother died, his dad giving this amulet, and he sees a vision of his mom and she's warning him like a ghost, keep this, don't sell it, let me protect you. And his dad says, your mother's love will always protect you. And he goes out and he sells it because he has gambling debts. And then he wrecks his car. And what it really was the amulet prevented him from turning into a werewolf. When he wrecked his car, he sold his amulet. and now and his friend, he was giving a lift to these two girls. So now the friend is supposed to follow and meet with them. It's raining and dark and all that. The two girls in the middle of the road. The friend sees the car wrecked, and he gets out. What's up? The girls run to his car and jump in. They knew each other, but they were like hitchhikers kind of thing. And they're like, we saw this horrible beast. So the guy grabs his gun. He goes, where? And he ends up killing the monster. The monster comes to attack him. He shoots it dead. And of course, then it turns into his friend. And so it's like comes full circle, kind of maybe a predictable ending. The very, very end is like, well, he's going to turn back to his friend. But for me, the surprise was, the fun of it was laying it out like this nice guy. He's, okay, I'll help these girls. He's a rich guy and all that. And he's a monster. So I like doing that little twist there.
And it's a good twist because not only with those types of stories, the werewolf, you know, he gets bit, or like he knows that something has happened to him that makes him aware that, oh, I'm gonna be a werewolf. But with the amulet keeping him from becoming a werewolf and not knowing that, that's a good twist. I like that. That's different.
The fun of it too is, and you probably experienced this, you know, as the writer, what's going to happen. And you've got to be careful that you don't act in such a way to give it away until you're ready to give it away. And then once you pop the surprise, you got to go back and reread it to make sure all the clues were there, but you don't give it away early, but you don't cheat. You didn't cheat and bring up something nobody saw it coming. The clues have to be there.
Yeah. Now, see, in my first book, not so much in my second book, and my third book's a lot harder. But in my first book, I made the rookie mistake of, look here, did you see that? Did you catch that? Did you catch that clue? Did you see that? So by the end of it, a lot of people are like, yeah, I saw it coming. I still enjoyed the read, but I saw it coming. And it was because I was fearful that they wouldn't get it. Like they would get to the end and be like, that doesn't make sense. So I overcompensated and went, look at that.
It's a delicate balance because you have to put enough out there so that the reader can look at it again and say, okay, I see all the building blocks that got me here. Right. But you can't overdo it to where, you know, a third of the way through, they're like, well, it's obviously so-and-so. So that's where the red herrings come in.
Right. And it's a matter of breadcrumbs and not a loaf. Yeah. That's what I did.
And so as an author, you're like, okay, I want to lay out this story. This is the bad guy. And I know from day one he's the bad guy. And you're like, okay, so he's the bad guy, or she, or whatever. And it's like, now, that was a neat story, but there's no mystery about who the bad guy is. So now we got to put in some other stuff to, make this person really mean, and everybody will want that person to be the bad guy. And then they die, and it's like, well, they can't be the bad guy, then can they?
Yeah.
They become a victim or something. That's fun.
Yeah, and see, that's what I love, is I love doing the twists and turns, the misleading of who the potential bad guy is. And then I, you know, because I get people like, I was so sure it was this person, and then it was this person. Then I was like, well, maybe it is this person, you know, and I feel like when they tell me that, I'm like, then I did my job.
Yeah, exactly.
That's how it's supposed to go.
Exactly.
So, you know.
And it's fun too, when you know, like say there's 30 chapters, and you know in chapter 20, the person you've led everybody to think it is, something happens where it can't be them. You know, they have a video of them in Las Vegas. Well, they couldn't have been in Miami doing the killing then, or they get killed, they become a victim of the killer. And like say that's chapter 20, and your beta readers, all of a sudden you get all these emails when they hit chapter 20. It's like, I did not see that coming. I'm like, yes, you know.
Done your job. That's the way it goes.
It's so much fun. It's like Steven Spielberg said, and Alfred Hitchcock said, I like to play the audience like a piano. And that's what I like to do. I like to set it up and have maybe a moment of levity, and bang, some big horrible thing happens, and okay, now you suspect this person. Now you yank the rug out from under you. And that is, in addition to writing the story, it's like you're playing a giant practical joke on your reader the whole time, and you know it and they don't, and they just happily go along.
I never thought of it that way. Yeah, I never thought of it that way, but you're right. You're absolutely right. So let me ask you this. Are you I take it you're an outliner or a pantser or a little bit of both? Like, what is your writing process that makes you so successful in setting that out?
So what I like to do is, like, so right now I'm working on the third book in the Jet Thacker series. She's an investigative TV reporter, and she basically solves mysteries, like, you know, Scooby-Doo and the Mystery Machine and all that, right? It's like, I didn't want her to be a cop because there's rules for cops. They can and can't do certain things. I'm like, who can do whatever? I'm like, an investigative TV reporter. They break the rules. And I even thought as a PI, and I thought even private investigators have some rules and maybe aren't always thought of in the light we'd like to think of them as. But a TV journalist, high profile that. So, and then investigative TV journalist where she's going to go and do these adventures where she probably shouldn't. That would be the interesting part, right? So, so I started in on that and that idea, and I said, okay, in the first book, I wanted this to happen. So again, give an example here. So I have an idea of what I want to occur in this story, just a big idea of it's going to be X, whatever X is. I said, okay. Now I say, if I sit down and start writing, I have a lot of energy and a lot of excitement for a couple of days or a week, and then it starts to be harder. Like, well, what happens now? What happens now? So all I do is I move that process forward, and I say, okay, I'm gonna spend a couple of days or a week or a month or how long it takes to say this, then this, then this. Like, so we start the mystery here. It's going to end here. They're going to catch the bad guy. Jet's going to do it. Jet's going to catch the bad guy. There's my bookends. In between, she's going to have to run for her life a couple of times. Okay. And I start thinking about fun ways to do that. I was at the airport yesterday. I'm like, what if you had, on the 6th floor of the airport parking, you drive up this big spiral ramp to get up there? I'm like, there's no room to maneuver. What if somebody was running the other way, running for their lives? You'd run them over. I was like, I'll do that to Jet. I'll give her an excuse to be at the airport running for her life, have to run down the thing. I'm like, okay, that's a good one. In another one I had really built it up to where this weird guy was probably the killer, and he goes into a 7-Eleven, and the clerk is watching the TV and is hearing about the murder, and the guy starts talking about, he makes some kind of comment like, oh, so they talk about what kind of gun the killer had. And he goes, instead of saying, I have that same gun, he says something like, that's my gun, or something like that, right? So where you can say, oh, it's like, that's my team. The Buccaneers, that's my team, right? Obviously, I'm not Malcolm Glazer, the owner of the team. So it's a colloquial thing. She takes it as he's the killer, and he's kind of hitting on her, but he's clumsy, and so he's like asking her questions, and she's like, he's trying to keep me here and do something, and he's weird, and she doesn't want anything to do with him. Now she's looking him over like, is that mud on his shoes, or is that blood on his shoes? What's he doing with his hands? And why is he getting in his pocket? So she gets more and more and more scared, and he's just some goofball whose wife was working on the case, and he was just sharing information, trying to hit on this girl. So you build up a little scene like that where it's a totally involved little bubble unto itself. This guy who's not really part of the story, and this clerk who's also not really part of the story, but it's a great dramatic moment and kind of a red herring, but it's a very short red herring, because basically as soon as I lead you in, by the time it's done or a chapter later, that wasn't it. But it was a great little thrill ride, which is very similar to writing a short story. So that's where those skills kind of come into play a lot of times for me.
Now, I also noticed in a lot of your videos that you take inspiration from everywhere. Like you were saying, I saw your TikTok on the airport, which, you make, the spiral thing, that's a great idea. And then you have your jogs and your walks, and you're always like, how an author looks at something, and so what, as far as, is there any place that, do you take a notebook with you, or you just keep it up here?
Now,
or
you write a lot of notes by hand, right? Do you carry a notebook?
Yeah, I do.
So I have my phone, which is as good as a notebook, and you can type a little notepad message. I like to do talk to text. So when I was in the airport, I thought, what a neat idea. And now I'm thinking, well, what would give her a reason to be running down that ramp? What would have to happen? Oh, somebody lured her there and got her out of her car. Well, if that was me, how would they get me out of my car? They'd text me a message. Yeah, it's me. Flash the lights. Come over here. And then I get out of the car. And next thing you know, I'm being shot at. I got to run for my life. Now that's what I'm thinking today. By the time I go to write it, maybe I actually come up with something better. So then what I did was I pulled out my phone. I turned on Notepad with talk to text, and I just kind of narrate to myself. I think this, maybe this, maybe that. And I just kind of capture the idea, and I just email it to myself, and I take that email and I actually copy it and paste it into a Word document, and I throw it in that file of that book. So now when I go to that file of that book, I've got like 20 different little scenes that don't necessarily have to happen and may or may not be related to each other. So maybe it's Jet, or maybe it's the victim, or maybe it could be anybody. I just thought it would be a neat scene. So I kind of draw my inspiration from anywhere. And then as I go through, I just collect them all, and I say, okay, this fits, this doesn't fit. And I just create a new file as like ideas, throw them over there. They're not right for this book. Maybe they'll be right for some other book. Now, what do you do? Do you just like, well, again, same question to you. Where does your inspiration come from? Like, where do those little scene ideas come from?
So for instance, little odd things happen. I have my friend Dawn, she's on my thing. She used to be a reporter. And so she's used to people like, they just talk to her. There's just something about her that you just want to let your soul out, and I kind of have the same thing happens to me. But I'm a problem solver. And my mother, also worked in loss prevention for years, and she taught us, being a kid of the 80s, Adam's Story, stuff like that, to always be aware of strangers. We had a special password so nobody could pick us up that wasn't allowed, things like that. So I'm always one of these individuals that I'm always kind of looking over my shoulder, and not that I'm paranoid, I'm just aware of my surroundings.
Yeah, you're
And
supposed
so
to be aware of your surroundings.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
not
so
paranoid.
yeah, so every now and then, I had a gentleman came up to my front door, and I have a locking screen metal door, and then I have my door, and he had a baseball cap on and dark shades, and he had something in his hand. And so I was like, oh, he must be selling me something, a flyer. And I answered the door, but I kept my screen door locked. And he goes, this was by your mailbox. And I look down and I see that it's one of my letters that should be in my mailbox. And the first thought was, well, it's junk mail, you can just throw it away, which of course he's not. I mean, why would I tell him that? That's the first thing I thought. And I said, okay, well, I'll take it. And so I opened up my screen door, and I realized this guy's a stranger. I don't know who he is. And then as I took it, he's like, well, have a good day. And then I recognized it was my neighbor from across the street. And I was like, oh, I do know who he is. But I thought, oh my gosh, that would be such a good way for one of my character to let or someone to be taken advantage of or whatever. Basically shut the door in his face because I had to get to my notebook to write it down before I forgot it.
Yeah, that's the
Kind
thing.
of rude on my
Capture
part.
the idea quick. Now, Stephen King says if those ideas are good, you won't forget about them. I'm like, nah, I don't want to rely on my memory that much. I'll capture it, and then later when I'm looking at it, I'll assess if it's worth pursuing or not. But I want to capture it, and I enjoy capturing it. It could be a scene that like that, simple enough. The guy didn't do himself any favors by having the glasses and the dark and all that stuff. But what a great ploy, right? And who wouldn't do that? Open their door for a neighbor, even if if you open the door for them, you don't know that there wasn't some guy around the corner saying, "Go, here's a gun in your back. Go get her to open her door. Hand her this and tell her to open the door. She'll do it for you because you're the neighbor."
Yeah. Well, and I'm always my girlfriends, they're always like, they're like, oh yeah, I got a date. And I'm like, okay, you want to make sure you have your stun gun. I mean, I'm always like, not because I'm paranoid of people, but it's just like, you have to be prepared for anything that could possibly happen. And it's because I watch too much true crime. That's my problem, Dan, is I watch way too much true crime for inspiration.
So people like you, as in women of a certain age, it's not usually teenage girls watching true crime. Okay. Usually it's people over the age of 30, mostly women. So I was listening to a podcaster who used to be a newscaster, and she said, and she watched true crime too, and reads the novels, and she goes, she thinks the reason why it appeals to that particular demographic is because women are often the victims of crime, and they're more vulnerable because of physical, what do you call it? Stature, not stature. Is it stature? Physical ability. Like the attacker, if the attacker, and the average attacker, if it's a man, is physically larger than, potentially more powerful than the average victim if it's a woman. That kind of imbalance. And she said that's what appeals to women about those true crime stories and the mysteries and all that stuff.
Well,
is that your thinking on it?
Well, I guess I'm a big believer in good and evil. And I think one of the reasons why I like writing mysteries is there's a lot of evil in this world. And with true crime, you kind of get the inside scoop of, I mean, some of the things that I watch, I'm just like, because I think I'm inherently a good person. So I get, just stunned at some of the things that these evil people do. But the cool thing about writing a mystery is, yes, evil things happen, someone dies, multiple people die, but good in the end always triumphs. The bad guy is always either taken out, killed, or arrested or something. And very rarely does the bad guy get away with it, you know, it might in a series, but eventually he's got his upcomings coming, you know. And so with watching true crime, I get fascinated with how wacko some of these people are that have done these terrible, terrible things. And I may not be able to comprehend it because I couldn't do it, but it fascinates me and it makes me want to write about it because if I write about it, then I know good is going to win. You know, I'm gonna make it win. But yeah, I guess there's also that sense of being scared. You know, here I'm in my nice, warm, cozy house with my two guard dogs, and I'm watching this, you know, terrible thing happen to somebody else, and but I'm safe. You know,
To me, it's like the roller coaster at the fair or the amusement park. You know it's safe, but it's still scary. So it's
Mhm.
being able to enjoy that thrill, but knowing you're going to be okay at the end. And so
Yeah,
that's what I try to do with my readers. I'm like, I'm going to put you in all, because you're going to connect with the character. I'm going to put this character in all these things. So vicariously, you're going to be watching this stuff unfold. And that's the roller coaster. But at the end, basically the promise is if there's another Jet Factor book, she probably survives the one you're reading. You know, if there's a next one in the series, we're not going to name it after her and then kill her off in book 2 and have 10 more books. She's probably going to be okay. Just like
yeah,
always, I ask my friends, my one friend, I go, just me before I ever read Harry Potter, knowing there was 8 or whatever books, I kind of figured he didn't die in the first one. So I was never really worried that he was going to die. And she goes, no, but he gets in these situations where death could happen. And sometimes it was very imminent. I'm like, okay, that's fair. You know, you're not thinking about it in that moment, like consciously. If you're enjoying the story, you're not thinking about, I know this guy survives. You're like, this is a dramatic moment to be in the middle of with this
yeah.
character kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of the neat thing about having an assembly cast when you have, like you said, you have your two main characters, you know, Jet and her best friend, but then I'm sure you have all these other quirky characters around. And it gets to be where, like, no, you obviously can't kill off your main character, but you can kill off the, you know, the fan favorite or someone that they, you know, maybe, you know, and that way it's kind of like you keep the reader still
Yeah.
guessing. Like, I hope they make it.
I did a Game of Thrones. I was watching Game of Thrones while I was writing the Gamma sequence. That's a medical thriller, kind of almost sci-fi. And like you said, in the first book, you got these two characters, and you add a couple because they can't interact in a vacuum. And then some of those characters I carried over to the second and third book. And I think it was the third book, second or third one, I forget, where there was a character who I liked a lot, but I had set up for her to be in a certain situation where I'm like, I don't really know how she gets out of it. It wasn't a main character. It was one of the secondary characters. I'm like, there's just no way for her to get out of this. And she was married to a very important secondary character. Okay. So they were kind of not really partners, but I guess that's not important. So, and then I sat there and I said, well, you know, when I look at various authors that I like and admire, what have they done in these situations? And I'm like, Stephen King would kill him off. J.R. You know, Game of Thrones, George R. R. Martin would kill him off. I'm like, God, I'm
Yep.
going to kill her. And I said, and not only am I going to kill her, I'm going to have a lot of the members of the team get wiped out. And then everybody will be wondering, nobody's safe. Are these two main characters I
Mhm.
like, are they going to come out okay? And it was kind of hard to do. And I set it up beautifully. I mean, her death is, if you can say it, it's a beautiful death. It's like the reader's like, oh my God, they're all. But we did it with respect, and it wasn't just insignificant. She died doing something
Right.
heroic. You know, kind of is the best way to say it. Uh,
Yeah.
and um, and she exacted her pound of flesh against the villain, and took out one of the villains in the process. So it was kind of a, you know, but it was one of those deals where it's like she knew, the reader figured it out with the character. It's like, you're the bad guy and I'm not the bad guy, and we're in the same room, and you've done horrible things to my family. I'm going to kill you, and I'm probably going to die in the process, but you're going down. Like that kind
Yeah.
of heroism. And
Yeah.
the scene doesn't start that way, but about halfway through the scene, you figure out, oh my God, she's going to kill the bad character. How's she going to get out? And then she doesn't get out, and you're like, yeah, she wasn't going to get out of that one. And I felt bad because, like I said, I killed a couple of characters in that one. But one of the reviews said, I was reading this book and I was wondering, is anybody going to come out alive? And I was like, well, good. I want you. There's a new level of mystery. Like, if he would kill these people, would he also kill some of the main characters? The answer is yeah. If that's what I got to do, I'll do it.
Yeah. Now you just mentioned do you read your reviews? I know some authors are like, or do you, is it, do you
I don't
like the
read
four
them
and
all.
fives or?
I don't read them all. I certainly can. There's not so many that I can't read them. I guess what I like to do is when I'm first launching the book, I want to make sure it's getting out to the right people and that people are enjoying it out of curiosity. The first couple of dozen, I'll just check and see. Like I often joke, I said I got a 5-star review that said best book I ever read, followed by a 1-star review that said this person shouldn't be writing, followed by another 5-star review saying it's the best book they ever read. I enjoy that. As far as
Yeah.
do I beat myself up? No, my book's going to average out about 4.5, 4.2 stars. Some people are not going to like it and they're going to trash it, and that's okay. It helps it stay away from people who don't like things those people don't like.
Yeah.
But the vast majority of people, if I can get them to read the book at all, they're going to enjoy the book. And so my concern is always on marketing. And
Now I just have
yeah, go ahead.
sorry to interrupt. I just have a question from a reader on this subject.
Okay.
Nancy Peterson narrates. Hi, Nancy. Says, have we ever thought, or have you ever thought about a review partner?
I don't have review partners per se. I used to have critique partners. Critique partners would be basically, I would assume, that kind of that same role. Who they're, as you're writing it, maybe you're bouncing ideas off them, or it's usually other authors who are, you're helping them, they're helping you, kind of thing. So critique partners.
I think a review partner, and correct me if I'm wrong, Nancy, I think it's someone that reads your reviews for you. And then kind of like if it's something that's like really detrimental, that's just going to give you imposter syndrome or bum you out or, drain your writing inspiration, they just don't tell you.
No,
but they share you the good stuff. Nancy.
No, let's put it this way. And you'll experience this. When you put out your first book, maybe in your second book, you're much more concerned about call it audience reaction. Mm-hmm. But now there's people who bought 2 of your books and enjoyed both of them. They're very likely to buy your next book. And people who didn't buy the first or second one, or who buy the first one and didn't like it, are much less likely to buy the second one. Probably not going to buy the second and third one. So it tends to sort itself out. So now let's suppose you do 3 books in that series and you start a new series that's something else, right? Similar but not the same. More crime drama but different characters, okay? Or set somewhere else or whatever. Very unlikely that people are going to, because you have a reputation, so the sources you put it through, Amazon and whoever, are going to initially put it to the people who liked your other stuff.
Right.
So after a couple of books, I don't really worry about that too much. I just don't.
Now, have you ever had a review that you took to heart and was like not discouraged, but like you learned something from, or you felt it was like beneficial to you?
It can be. I mean, if somebody says you should stop writing, it's like, okay, it was beneficial to me to know that you have terrible taste, But
yeah, don't listen to that.
So I don't want it to sound the wrong way. It's like, yeah, you can learn from people all the time. So what tends to happen is when I send it out to my beta readers, I always have a couple of new beta readers that are joining the group. And then I have advanced reader copy readers. These are people who have websites and blogs and who enjoy mysteries, and they read tons of books. These people, they read so many books. And it's like, okay, but part of their job is they got to be honest with me. Same with the critique partners. So if something's going wrong, when you're writing your first couple of books, if you're going down the wrong track, the critique partners early in that process need to be honest and tell you, as I would be honest and tell them. But once you've done it a few times, it's like, okay, I don't know that I need that instruction. And I've been inside this framework now. If I want to go outside the framework, we're going. And if it crashes and burns, I don't care. And sometimes that's where big failures come from. And sometimes that's where great successes come from. And I'm okay with it either way. I have a romance book that I put out. It's probably got 100 reviews that are mostly favorable. But in the description, I said, this is a romance, but it's very funny. It's a lot of sex. And I kind of laid out that the guy cheats on his wife. So if that's going to bother you, don't read this book in the first place. And a few of the reviews were like, I picked it up, but what's funny about cheating on your wife? It's like, well, there you go. The book's not for you. But even with that review, that's going to help other people who feel that way not find the book.
Right.
And this was just about this it's supposed to be a comedy, and everybody involved, the wife, the mistress, the husband, everybody makes mistakes, and it's all very, very funny. But it's fair to say, I don't think that's funny. Okay, that is not for you.
Yeah.
I made great
Yeah.
strawberry ice cream. You don't like strawberry ice cream. You like chocolate. Hey, chocolate's over there. Strawberry was over here. So I
Yeah.
don't worry about that too much.
Yeah. Now, you gave some really good advice that you had messaged me back about that with your beta readers, that at the end of your copy, you have certain set questions for your beta readers.
I did that one time where I had them like at the end of every chapter, like 5 questions. It was like the same 5 questions, but it was so that I could see, like you're laying out the trap. It's like, on chapter 10, I want to know, did it work? Rather than have them get to chapter 30 and forget they wanted to tell me about something at chapter 10. So I did that once. And then, but with my beta readers, yeah, I usually, I might send the book out to 20 beta readers, and maybe 15 of them will be able to get it back to me in the time I need or whatever. And so of them, maybe 10, I'll have some follow-up questions like, how was the pace? Was anything slow? A lot of times I have a lot of strong female protagonists. So a lot of times I'll ask, especially this last one with Jet Thacker, because it's mainly her book. I'll ask, did any of the female characters say or do anything a woman wouldn't say or do? And one example, I think I gave this, and one of the things we were talking about was on a different live session, was I had a fellow writer have these 16-year-old boys, and they were talking about cars, and something happened. The one kid cried. I'm like, dude, 16-year-old boy will die before he cries in front of his friends. And they would have to come up and say, your mother just died. He can cry then, but if it's otherwise, he's not some frail kid, according to that story. And by the same token, there would be things, maybe theoretically. I feel like if I have a strong characters do strong things. It doesn't matter if they're male or female, but I always like that little moment of retrospection. So with Jet Thacker, she had a neighbor across the hall who was basically kind of an abandoned 10-year-old. Her parents had gotten divorced. They traveled all the time. Each one, it's like his weekend for me, but he forgot. So here I am by myself again. So Jet kind of takes care of that kid. And so you just know, as tough as she is, she's got a huge heart. Because the kid sees her walking down the hall, comes out, takes her, because Jet's got her hands full. The kid takes the keys out of Jet's purse, opens the door for Jet's apartment, goes in, turns off the alarm, plops down on the couch. They're talking about what they're going to have for dinner. So it's like, that's a different kind of relationship. And it tells you a lot about Jet, the fact that her home is so open to that kid,
Yeah. 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 Now, see, I ran into, I had a younger character, and my beta reader, she has a daughter that's about that age. And she was like, they don't talk like that. You're giving this character some great lines, but it's too old. You got to hip up the speech a little bit. And I was so glad she pointed that out, because it didn't dawn on me that, I'm a little bit behind the times, instead of, everyone calling somebody like babe, it's bae. And I'm like,
yeah,
I hope I pronounced that right.
Well, so the other side of that. It's bae for a while, maybe a year or two, and then maybe it's not bae anymore. But you're right. Like a married couple at just 25, they're going to refer to each other as babe all the time. I never called my wife hun. I got around my niece. This is a long time ago when my wife and I had been married 5 years, and my little niece, who was maybe 4 or 5, kept calling everybody hun, because that's what her parents called each other. Okay, my brother and his wife. Yeah. And so teasingly, my wife kept calling each other hun on that vacation together with those guys, because the kid did it. And then it just kind of became a habit. So we kind of were doing it then, but it really wasn't the right word for people that age. Whatever the right word would have been, I don't know. I don't remember. But, and another thing is, how much are they on their phones? I've seen comments on other books where, on TikTok, people do it. So, this is a good book, but there were like 3 places where they could have ended the story after 10 pages because they just would have Googled it and they would have known. And I was like, yeah, that's a whole new trick you got to avoid.
Yeah, technology is almost the bane of existence to a mystery book. Here I have my character set on a fictional island but it's not a remote island per se. But I have to figure out, my character has to get on a ferry to go to, let's say, the ballistics, or the big sheriff's office, and because she's got her little office, but go see the big time coroners over in Seattle. So I at least have some of that she, and then part of it's set in a national park, which I can luckily get away with no cell service,
Right. I
so
did the
that they
same
don't
thing.
have to. Yeah, don't have to Google it, because you're right. And though I'm sure detectives in real life are like, listen, people, we don't just Google and it's solved like that. I mean, I'm sure there's
No.
still a lot
No,
of
but
legwork, but in a
there's
book,
times you don't want the character to have access to the cell phone. So I did the same thing. I had him in a national park, and I have characters early on saying, self-service where you're going, self-service isn't real good there, so do this first or whatever. And it's like, okay. And then when I didn't want them to have their phones, it was because they were in the place where we had already said no service. And she takes out her phone. She's like, oh crap, I can't get a text. I can't get a whatever. So you might have somebody wanting to warn the other character and they can't because there's no service where that character is. And meanwhile, the killer's, stalking them or whatever.
right?
So you kind of want to paint that. Another way is I had one of the characters dropped her phone in the toilet because I didn't want her to have it for a while. And then when she was a cop, so she got it replaced. It was a work cell. She got it replaced, but something wasn't there. Like, I don't remember if they had a new number or not. So the person who needed to contact her couldn't, because part of the time the phone didn't work until she got it replaced, and it wasn't transferred over to where the number was working yet. It was working, but it wasn't. I don't know, something like that. I'm
Yeah,
forgetting the detail, but so
yeah.
you can create some devices, but then the other side is like, if you have access to all this information on your phone and you're a potential victim, why wouldn't you access some of that information and steer yourself around the rocks? And of course, we need to steer into the rocks if it's going to be a good
Right.
story. So we have to watch out for that stuff.
Yeah, yeah. I tell you. Well, I have another question. I wrote it down.
Sure, fire away.
So speaking of googling and stuff, so with the stories that you write, and with just murder mysteries in general, I think authors find themselves digging down into Google to do research. Now, I have found that I follow the rabbit hole. And maybe that's because I'm so new that I'm like, ooh, all these neat ideas of what can happen. But I find something and then I'm finding myself clicking on pictures and just getting obsessed. Are you, now that you've got a lot of books underneath your belt, are you disciplined, or do you follow the rabbit hole? Do you Alice in Wonderland it, or just
It depends. So for this latest story that I did, Killer in the Dark, that's the one that just came out. Literally just came out a couple days ago. Um, she's this is Jet Factor. She's going to near a national park, the Ocala National Forest, and that's in North Florida. And so they have Florida Panthers, or they exist in Florida, right? They're very rare. They're endangered. You don't run into them very often. But if you're hiking or something out in the Everglades, you might see one. Well, so there's a preserve in my story near that national park, and this victim, as Jet is going to interview the guy who runs the preserve, that morning they discover a body of someone who looks like they were killed by a big cat. And everybody's thinking, these people grow up around Florida Panthers, even they don't see them very often, but was it a big cat from his preserve? Is somebody up to something? Was it a Florida Panther? So that kind of sets the stage. Now, that means the guy, his name is Bronson Keenan, he runs the preserve. So now I got to do some research on what does such a preserve look like? What do the cages look like? What is a routine for this guy going to be? There's a park ranger involved. And you have a park ranger. What does a park ranger do all day? What are some of the things, if I showed up, what might they be doing? And if I said, can I talk to you? I need an hour of your time. Well, I can't because I got to do this, but I can meet you after sunset, or what are their hours? And do they sleep at the park? Do they not? So you got to look into those things. And Google and YouTube are great ways to find that. But then how much I need to learn to represent the character properly,
Mhm.
but I'd probably learn, say, 10 times as much or maybe 100 times as much as what's needed for the story. But I feel like I need to know it. There's not going to be much places where it's going to manifest itself, but when it does, it has to be right. Right.
Right.
So to that end, yeah, I learned a lot about cages and feeding of tigers and wild, big cats, and that they get medicines, and if you feed them every day, a little bit every day, then they're much less likely to attack somebody, and on and on and on. How tall the enclosures are, And then, I watched an interview with a national park ranger. I think it was a national park ranger, talking about his day. He's like, "Oh, I have this great job, a great wife, great kids, blah, blah, blah. I'm outdoors all day." But some of the things he didn't like was this, this, this. And I'm like, okay, that I got to know that so I can have my character doing some of those things when the people pull up to talk to him or her, So,
Yeah.
so I don't know how much rabbit hole that is. That's like, you got to have some information, but I only spent, so I watched a lot of big cat videos, and unfortunately, you watch several of them. You have to go through a few before you get the information you actually wanted. Like, how tall are the enclosures? You may have to sit through a couple of videos before you can see, or somebody talks about that. And the first ones you'll find are the ones that were more exciting for people to watch. So it's going to be somebody doing something stupid or being attacked or almost attacked. And you have to wade through that to sift through. So that takes time. So you might spend 3 or 4 hours finally getting to the ones that are valuable to you. And then you may spend 3 or 4 hours of that. So maybe a day and a half or 2 days to become a big cat expert so that I could represent my character properly. And another thing was hunting. He used to be a hunter. So I had to watch some hunting videos where, how do you, when you have to kill one of these animals, how is it done? Doesn't make me an expert. And I don't want to be an expert, but I have to know, what does it look like when the animal gets shot and dies? What's that process like? And so I would say, a couple of days. I don't spend a week or a month looking at that stuff. So let me turn it around on you. You have to research things like park rangers. How much rabbit hole? So based on what I said, does it sound like I went down a rabbit hole or no?
No, it sounds like you were pretty disciplined. It sounds like you chased it. Like you didn't just go to the first Google search. You looked into it. But like, for instance, I have in my park ranger there's a murder that's possibly a bear mauling, and so I, of course, Googled what does that look like, because you have Hollywood's version and then there's the real life version of what that looks like. And there are some things that I wish I had not seen, but at the same time, super fascinating, and you just I cannot not look. I can't turn away. And then my most recent book is about a body that's been in seawater for a while. And so you have to realize, what does that do to a human body that's decomposing? And that was fascinating.
And gruesome.
Way more than I need to.
Yeah, but those are hard to watch.
Yeah. So
that's another thing that's not like they portray in Hollywood. They bloat up like marshmallows, and people don't understand that because you're absorbing all that moisture or whatever.
Yeah.
And I was just going to say, I think, don't they all turn white? Like, no matter what race they are, when they're in salt water, don't they all turn white?
One of the things that I found is it's called washerwoman hands is what they call it. And the skin starts to peel.
Yeah.
And so, but yet you can still get fingerprints on. So then I had to research, because I'm like, how do you ID this? And I don't want to ruin the book, but then I had to research, like, what would the coroner need to do to help figure out who this person is. And I was like, wow. It's getting harder and harder, I think, for bad people to get away with terrible things, because there's a lot of technology. Yeah.
You think that because we watch the shows where they get caught, but then you look at the crime stats and you're like, oh, no, they're getting away with that stuff left and right. So it's, but another thing you mentioned about when you make something accurate, whether it's, how a coroner does their thing or whatever, it's almost like, you can't make it too accurate, because the audience is coming to it with their base of the majority audience. This is what we see in movies and TV. If you get it dead on accurate and it's not like what they saw in movies and TV, they think the accurate is inaccurate. So you got to balance that as well. I don't have a lot of trouble with that, but I know authors who have been dead on accurate and their readers were like, this is not right. And it's like, wow.
I actually have a couple of reviews of people are like, oh, she didn't do her research. And I'm like, oh, yes, and you just are underneath a misconception, and which is fine. It's okay. But yeah, I'm like, oh no, I do my due diligence, and but I do, one of the other things that I am guilty of is I do take artistic license.
You're allowed to do that.
Well, but I've had some people that are like, because it's a fictional island, and my imagination is probably bigger than reality, and so I have a mountain on my island that
well, you have those out there.
Right, I do. We do, but they're not typically the height that I needed it to be to do what I wanted to have happen. Is a little bit higher than what is normally on an island out there in the Pacific Northwest, and I got called out on it, which but I look at that as taking some artistic license and letting yourself get lost in the fiction of the story. So it just really depends on this next book I drew back from that, and I was like, oh, okay, try to be a little bit more realistic, and it is fiction, but be more true to the area than I was. So you learn.
Listen though, I view something like that as, this is fiction. We're going to make up people. We're going to make up a place. And is it completely unrealistic that an island would have a mountain? I don't know. Go to Hawaii. They've got them. So it's not completely unrealistic. It's just not quite right for that area. How many people are actually going to focus in on that and have it be an issue? The Florida seal has a mountain on it. The seal of the state of Florida has a steamboat with like like a paddle wheel boat. I think we ever had those, and it's got a mountain in the background. We don't have any mountains, but you know what? That's how they did it. Maybe it was supposed to be a hill, but everybody thinks it's a mountain, and there's like no mountains in Florida. So you just so like I said, I mentioned I had some medical thrillers, and I had kind of a heart attack situation. I researched it. I watched some TV shows online, and I'm writing down, this chemical, then their drug or whatever, then this, these procedures, blah, blah, blah. The things they yell, bring the crash card, or what do they say, code blue, whatever it was. And then I try to research how accurate is that, try to find some like Mayo Clinic, what is involved in this. And inevitably, I had a couple of nurses were beta readers and a couple of doctors were beta readers to make sure it was cool. They didn't have an issue with anything I said. Then a book comes out, and there's like 6 books in that series, 5 books in that series, and somebody had an issue, and it was somebody who worked in a hospital. I don't think they were a doctor. They were like, that's not how it works. I'm like, well, fair enough. Maybe in your hospital, maybe in your country, because I had doctors look at this. They didn't point it out as an issue. And most of my readers are not doctors or nurses, so I'm okay. We're willing accomplices to the fiction. And if you need to slam me because of that, it's like my brother's cop. He would watch cop shows and be like, it's so unrealistic. Yeah, but is it fun? It's fun. Like a cop goes through their whole life, they never shoot their gun their whole career. But if you watch TV, it's every week they're unloading it on somebody. Right. He's like, yeah, this stuff doesn't happen. I was like, that's why it's fun to watch,
That's why we tune in.
You're allowed to do that stuff. You're allowed to do it. That's part of the fun. And let's face it, if it was all just reality, they wouldn't need, if it had to be completely realistic, then we wouldn't need fiction books.
Right. Yeah. So what was a book that, most writers are readers. So are you a big reader as well, or no, really?
No. So I write a book in about 2 months. Okay. So when so the other side of that is I get up early, I do it long, my eyes like get glued shut because they were so dry. And when I'm done with that for the day, I don't want to read. I've spent too much time reading all day. I don't want to read for relaxation. So I'll watch mindless TV, crime shows or comedy shows. Right now I'm watching Everybody Loves Raymond. I don't even know when that was on. In the 80s, maybe? I don't know. So I just a couple of episodes of that so I don't have to think. And even then, I'm still thinking about my story. I'm like, Raymond's doing whatever he's doing. My wife will walk out of the room doing something. She'll come back. She goes, oh, did such and such happen? Did they find whatever it was? They find the cake he was hiding? I'm like, I don't know. It's on, but I'm thinking about my story. We can rewind it because I have no idea. I'm not paying attention at all. So she's like, nah, no thanks. So now when I'm done with a book, then I try to grab 1 or 2 books and read them. And if we're on vacation, I try to read. So I'm much more like how many books would you say you read in the course of a year?
You know what? I'm a slow reader, believe it or not. It's not, I like to get immersed in the book. So I would probably say I read a good 5 books a month, but I know that's hardly any compared to some of the other people on Book Talk. I mean, they just
compared to Book Talk, you got people on Book Talk read 300 books a year. That's like one a day. I don't know how that's. Now I do know my one friend. She works in a hospital at night and she listens to audiobooks. So if you shift this 10 hours and the book is 8 or 10 hours. You're going to get it done in 1 or 2 nights. But she has the ability to do that, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people don't. So I might be lucky if I read 10 or 12 books a year. But what I do, I'll start a book because it was recommended, and after a couple of chapters, I'm just like not interested. So I dump it, mainly because I want to get the experience of what was fun for the reader about that book, but it's got to be an interesting and compelling read. And too many authors, traditionally published and independently published, they just take too long to get their story going. So I'm starting to lose interest. Then I'm like, can I just fan through this to find the interesting part or the big scene everybody liked? And can I learn that? If it's a romance, maybe can I get to the romantic part and see that unfold? But a lot of times with romance, it's the constant longing that takes place over a long period of time. So you can't really do that as much. But so sometimes you're reading for enjoyment. And sometimes, even though you're doing that, you're still kind of picking it apart. Like this isn't that well written, and it's not that good of a story. You can be one or the other, but you got to be one or the other. You got to usually be a good story at least, and a lot of them aren't. So I toss them. That's me.
One of the things that I found being on Book Talk is in the indie community, how many great writers there are out there. I mean, it is amazing. The people that you see them on there and you're like, oh, you're your friends and everything. Then they flash their book a couple of times. I do it as well. And then so you finally pick one up and you're like, this is really good. I suck. This is really good. And I'm one of these people that I enjoy several different genres. I enjoy romance, and now I have I'm diving into the spicy romance, reading, not the writing. And then I enjoy fantasy, high fantasy, deep thought fantasy, sci-fi, all sorts of stuff. But yeah, and it's awesome to see this community and that's becoming such a I'm trying to say, there's just a lot of variety out there. But boy, does it make me go, I get imposter syndrome so bad on some of these people that I'm reading that it makes, but then I'm like, no. So then I go and read my reviews to make myself feel better.
Here's the thing with
okay.
imposter syndrome. Anybody can feel like, you can have a sales rep who feels like, I'm an imposter. They're going to find out I'm no good at this or something. Anybody can have that happen to them, right? The flip side of that is if you sit down with a book with the intention of enjoying it, you're very likely to enjoy it. If you sit down with the intention of not enjoying it and finding things wrong with it, you're probably going to do that. So a lot of times I see books on TikTok where let's just say you post about some book you read that you really enjoyed, gave it 5 stars, you're all enthusiastic. I read the same book and I was, oh my God, I hated that book. I don't want to chime in and rain on your parade or pop your bubble. So politely, I'm just going to not opine. Most people are going to be that same way. So you're saying this book was so good is going to be followed by a bunch of comments people who like it or want to give it a try. Very rarely, there are people who say it wasn't for me, but very rarely are 100 people going to come out and say, oh my God, that was crap. It's just this particular venue doesn't work that way. It may at some point, but not right now. So as a result, when I've asked people for recommendations of books, they may have enjoyed the book and there's a bunch of other people who enjoyed it. That still doesn't mean that I was going to like it. So that was a mistake I made with that.
I was going to say, yeah, I saw you had 3 books that you had taken as recommendations and one that you did not seem to enjoy at all. And I haven't read any of the 3. Yeah. So have you got a chance to read the other 2 yet? The Troop is the one that I'm interested in. That's one that actually looked appealing to me. But I don't know if you got
The Troop was the best written of the 3. But so one mistake I made was I asked for recommendations and I don't like a research a book. I just took the recommendations. The 3 titles got mentioned the most. I bought the 3 books. Okay. I knew zero. It's not like when I'm shopping for a book and I read the back, I'm like, that sounds like a compelling story. So take The Troop, for example. Had I read the blurb, I'm like, I'm probably not going to be interested in a Boy Scout troop that's on an island that's under attack or whatever. I wouldn't have picked it up. Okay. But I wanted to purposely not do that. Let me just see what TikTok can recommend to me. So the one I didn't like was Clown in a Cornfield. I thought it just took forever to get going. I was not. It starts out with younger people. I think they're high school or around that age. and I just didn't find it interesting. Now it's a very popular book, and I also didn't necessarily like the style of writing. Okay, so now it's like Strawberry Chocolate. It just wasn't for me. I forget what the second was, and the third one was The Troop. Um, and I thought The Troop was written most how style wise was written most how I would write, phrasings and things like that. I thought, well, that's kind of cool. This guy writes the way I kind of like the way I write. I think that was Nick Cutter. I think, right? The Troop.
I honestly don't remember. I'll be
I think
honest.
so, and I think he's writes under a different name as well. I don't know which one is more popular, but so I was enjoying reading. I got a couple of chapters in, and then after a while, I'm like, okay, well, I see where this is headed. And then I happened to read either a review of it or maybe the blurb. Or no, I know what it was. It was you know how like some other author will give a testimonial and they'll put that on the cover of the book. It was on the cover of the book or the inside cover. I didn't read any of that. So as I'm kind of looking at the clock, like, okay, I got an hour. Do I want to go for the next chapter of this, or do I want to go do laundry or something? Right? Things that had to be done. And I happened to read the one testimonial thing. And it was, I don't remember who it was by. It was a famous horror author, let's just say. And it said it reads like an 80s slasher movie. And I was like, yes, it does. And I don't want to read an 80s slasher movie. That was like harboring in the background that I was like, there's something that teeter-totter. I'm enjoying parts and I'm not enjoying. And when I saw that, I was like, yep, that's kind of what this is like. And I wouldn't have picked this one up either. So actually I jettisoned all three, which really makes me sound like either a snob or petty, jealous sour grapes guy. And both could be true. But there was only so much time. And I'm like, if it's not delivering, I'm only going to get to maybe 12 books this year. And sometimes I'd rather reread a favorite book because I enjoy it than test the waters with something new. I'm kind of that way. I like to go to my favorite restaurant a lot more than I like to go to a new restaurant. Even though you may have a new favorite if you go to a new restaurant. So, yeah. And I read a lot of so I'm like an authors club, so I'm producing 31 published books for little kids that they wrote themselves. So I have to read a lot of those. So it's like it needs to be really good to get me to hang around. And I'm not saying those books aren't good. I'm just saying Strawberry Chocolate. They just weren't for me. All three of those books are wildly popular outside of TikTok. Just not right for me.
Just not right for you.
But
gotcha.
The Troop, I think
now, do you ever take a TikTok suggestion again, though, or are you kind of burnt on that?
No. I think what I would do is it's kind of like saying, where's a good ice cream shop? And somebody says, oh, Fred's is a great ice cream shop, and Fred makes strawberry ice cream the best you've ever had, and you don't like strawberry ice cream, or you're allergic to it, or whatever. And you go in there, it's like, well, how's your chocolate, Fred? It's like, oh, it's good. You know what? Maybe it is, maybe it's not, because Fred's known for strawberry, you know? So I don't know if that's a good comparison or not, but I would say this too. There's almost a pressure that comes to us like, I only have a limited window here before I got to start writing my next one. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like, almost like they used to say about looking at resumes, the first look is to get rid of it kind of thing. And so I gave each book, I think 20 pages, 20, something like that. With the Clown on Cornfield, I went over 100 pages. And see, if I write a murder mystery, I'm killing somebody on the first chapter to get the book going. I was 100 pages in and nobody had died. Theoretically, one person had, but I was just like, it's just taking too long for me. It's not just, and so.
And pacing in a book is very, very important, especially with the mystery. You like you said, you've got to grab the reader's attention right off the bat, and then keep that pace that they want to keep turning that page to see what's going to happen at the end of the book.
I think I'm really making myself sound bad here because there's plenty of books I'll read this year that I'll like, and plenty I read last year that I liked. I read Ian Fleming's Live and Let Die last year, and it's nothing like the movie with Roger Moore, but it was fun to read. And how they wrote, what do you write that, like in the 50s or the 60s? And like how much of it worked and how much of it didn't work, how they refer to certain people and things. And it was neat. It was an interesting story, but it was totally different from the movie they made. And I love that movie, that old Roger Moore movie, but it was fun to read. And I plowed through that thing. I went through a historical, not a historical fiction, but like a historical retelling by a famous author. I read a couple of those last year, and they were fun to read. But what do they all have in common is what you just said. Much faster pace than the reason I put down the books I put down. The pace wasn't for two of them. The pace wasn't right for me. With the Troop, the pace was pretty good on that one, but it was going to become an 80s. It was becoming an 80s slasher movie, and I'm like, I didn't have an interest in seeing that.
Yeah, yeah. So how do you keep your pacing on your books though?
So what I do is for each new chapter I start, I create a new document. Okay, so let's say I finish chapter 1, I save it as chapter 1. Then I write chapter 2 in a new document, and when I save it, it's chapter 2. But then I copy paste it into chapter 1, and now chapter 1 and 2 are over here as the book so far. So it's chapters 1 and 2. I just rename it, right? So I'll have each individual chapter, and then I'll have, which I kind of separate them, so they're not going to get confused in my thing. So because I'm doing that, each time I start a new chapter, I can look down at the word count. I see how far into it I am, and I really give myself like a maximum of 3,000 words to get done what I need to get done in that chapter. Once I hit around 2,000, I'm like, am I close to wrapping this up, or should I rework this into 2 chapters? So I guess the goal is partly to keep them short, but that's an artificial thing. It's to make me get to the point quickly. If I only have 2,000 words to make my point of whatever this chapter is, I'm not going to dilly-dally around with a lot of extraneous stuff that shouldn't be in there. And then because, and I think that's a relatively effective tool for everybody. And then because I'm not, when I take a moment to really deep dive or have somebody sitting there staring out the window thinking things, it has more impact because not every chapter has that stuff. It's like I said, the roller coaster only has a down because you had to go up. A roller coaster without an up is flat, and that's not a roller coaster. So you have to have both. And then, like I said, I asked my people, were there any slow spots, any this, any that, anything that's, any part you wanted to skim, any part you, and I want them to be honest. And some people, for the most part, everybody says no. What you expect? They like my writing, and by now it's my habit. I govern myself. So before they ever see it, I read it. And if I see a part that I think is slow, or I think a part I want to skim, I condense that myself before anybody else ever gets a chance. Because like I said, I'm kind of a lazy reader. So I write that way. It's like, I feel like I have to keep you interested every single page, or you're going to do what I would do, put it down and walk away and not pick it back up. And then what good did I do? So that's my approach.
Yeah. See, I get worried that's one of the first things I ask my beta readers is, did you want to turn the page? Did you want to keep going, or did you? And I realize that most people don't want to blow through an 80,000 word book in one day, but I at least want them to be like, put it away and then be like, oh, I got to get back to that book. That's what I want. I want them to be able to put it down and then be like, I got to get back to that book. And what I think the nicest compliments I can get is, I didn't get any sleep last night because I had to get to the end. I had to, and that to me is like,
oh yeah. They say things like, I stayed up way too late reading this because I had to finish. I love where I try to write in such a way where it's like 11 o'clock. You're thinking, okay, one more chapter. Next thing you know, it's 3 a.m. and you're like, gosh darn it. Well, I guess I'm calling out sick because I'm going to finish. But it's not coincidence. A lot of hard work goes into that. And part of governing that pace is you get 2,000 words to accomplish it. You go as much as 3. You're probably not going to do it in 800 words. But once you're past 3,000, and I had it this last book, Killer in the Dark, I had a big long ending sequence, and it was like 7,000 words. And I'm like, I can't have one chapter be 7,000 words after all the other ones were an average of like 2,200. Especially for the big dramatic climax, it's going to be read like it's slower, even though it's not slower paced, just because it's one big 7,000 word chapter. So I looked at, okay, if there's a natural breaking point, where's a place to have answered one question, asked another question, and end, so that to get that new question answered, we got to turn the page, kind of like what you were saying. And there's the trick. What we tend to do as authors is we write until we accomplish that task of that chapter. Okay, good. Now you got to back up a step and say, okay, if we accomplish the task of the chapter, did we have the reader say, okay, I'll set it down now? You can't do that. So you either got to ask a different question that now needs to be answered. Or like I say, bait that hook a little bit. It's like, okay, well, we dodged that bullet. Now, who was shooting at us? Yeah, who was shooting at us? We've got to turn the page. So I forget who said it. A famous author said, a chapter, you want to answer one question and ask another. So we have to turn the page to get that answer. And so that's, as you're getting ready to wrap up, you're like, okay, now what is the next question I'm going to ask to keep the page
Mm-hmm.
turning?
Yeah. That's the joy of a mystery.
Hopefully. Hopefully. But
So now,
don't you find that the real fun as a reader is finding a character you enjoy spending this time with, and then you want to spend the time.
yeah,
So I spend as much time on that as anything else.
yeah, I am in nature a problem solver. So I think the other reason why I enjoy mysteries, or something that there's an underlining theme under it, is trying to figure it out before the big reveal. I am terrible to watch a movie with, especially because I'm just like, I think it says this. Did you notice that happening? You know, the
I'm
person's like,
bad because I suspect everybody who comes on screen, oh, she did it. Next person comes on, oh no, he did it.
it is. Yeah.
But
And
that's
so,
what your reader wants. They want
mhm,
to be figuring it out with the detectives, so to speak, and they want to solve the problem like a jigsaw puzzle. They want to
yeah,
put the pieces together and be able to look at it and figure it out.
yeah,
That's part of the game. We play with them and they play with us.
yes,
And so
yeah.
we as the authors, we have to make sure we didn't cheat, that all the clues were there, but you can't, like we were
Mhm.
talking earlier, you got to keep that balance.
Yeah, and you don't want to bring in like that fifth character at the 0 hour that's like has all the answers, and then everyone's like, where'd this guy come from? You know, and why does he know what he knows? You know, I try really hard to avoid anything like that, because
Yeah,
to me
I
that's
hate that.
cheating.
It
To
is.
me,
That's exactly right. That's how I feel about it. Now, by the
yeah.
same token, it's like once the big mystery is solved, I always like to add on a very, very short finale type of chapter. It's like the big climax is done, Jet Thacker saved the day, whatever it is. And then a little wrap up chapter where
Mhm.
we know everybody we cared about is okay, kind of just
Yep.
wrapping up their little stories. And I'm much more inclined on a personal basis to have the big climactic finish and end it. But my readers, like, we want to know what about this guy, that guy, just kind of have a conversation with two people saying that it all turned out okay. And then you're basically setting
Well,
the
and
course
I
for right
think you
off
have.
into the sunset.
Yeah, and see, I do the same thing, because I think, here you build up this suspense, and your reader in essence is holding their breath, and so that final last wrap up chapter kind of lets them go,
Yeah, maybe
okay,
that's not a
yeah,
good way to look at it.
that's how I look at it. It lets your reader finally go, okay,
Well,
I can.
I look at books and movies or other types of stories where, when, like, say, Indiana Jones, that first one from the '80s, Raiders of the Lost Ark, when he was done doing the big climax, they still had that little scene where he's talking to the government officials. And he's like, "What are you doing with this thing? We got top people working on it." And we see it get put in a warehouse, and he walks out. He's frustrated, and Marion's there with him. And it's like, "Well, I know what something, like, she's going to spend time with him."
Yeah,
And
I
we
know
go
what
to
I
see
have.
them walk off into the sunset, right? And then we see the government bureaucrat guy where in a big warehouse where it's just going to be put away. It's like,
Seal
tighten it up
burns
with a neat
off.
little bow.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
think so. Since I enjoy those things, another Spielberg movie, Jurassic Park. At the very, very end, all the dinosaurs are done. They're flying home in the helicopter. Since I like that in movies and books, I put that little. I try to make it as short as possible to know that's how I like to go out as an audience member, reader, or viewer. So that's what I do in my books.
Now, correlating books to movies that affected, I think, our childhoods. I think you and I are about close to around the same age. I have more gray than you, but
I got some
so
in there. If I go outside, it looks like it's all gray. That's what I don't get. That's why I don't
yeah,
do videos inside. This lighting, for whatever reason, doesn't. I don't know. Doesn't
helps
look like I
out.
have any gray hair.
Yeah. So with that happening now, one of the movies that influenced me, and I'm a big Star Wars fan, is Empire Strikes Back. You know, the A New Hope, happy ending, big clown, and then the Empire Strikes Back was a big bummer overall, and then you end with, you know, this big reveal, and then where's Han Solo, and now that how they're going to get him back, and so then you were really holding on to Return of the Jedi because you were looking for the answers of why, what happened, and well, how, you know. So in my writing, I want to do that, but I have a hard time with the bummer side of it all. I'm such a happy-go-lucky person that writes about murder and mayhem. It's a, you know, but you know, do you feel in your books that you've got to bring the bummer down to bring the highlight up later?
So, like we said before, the roller coaster without a big incline is
Right.
not a roller coaster, and that works with emotion too. If you can have a moment of levity where the reader can kind of chuckle and take a breath, then you can punch them again real quick. But if it's all just punches, they either get tired of it, or they get used to it, or they're expecting it too much. So you gotta bring in both. As far as a reader myself, I think the books that I enjoy best are have those elements where they bring a variety of things to the front. Now, you're talking specifically that whole second movie was kind of a downer of a movie, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of people who like that movie the best out of
I,
all of them.
yeah,
You do?
I
I
do.
would say I don't have a downer book that way, but in my book I might have a downer segment, you know. But I don't think well, I know, okay, but I betray myself because if you like those characters I killed off in that one book, because I killed a lot of them, you might find that book was a bit of a downer. So, I mean, I
Yeah.
have villains doing villainous things, so there are downer moments as those villainous things take place. But no, I don't think I do that. I'd have to give that some thought, but I don't think so. But what about you?
Yeah.
Is that what you do?
Well, I can't reveal too much because it's in the new one that's going to come out at the end of May. But I'm trying to set the breadcrumbs that there's going to be some conflict potentially in the future that's going to have to be over challenged, overwhelmed, or you know, or solved. It might take something in a different direction that you know, may not be a good fun direction to go in, but yet yeah, see, no, my side of the window is like no spoilers.
Well, that's fair. Okay, so here's a good example. So in the Jet Factor Mysteries, in the first book, she gets fired from her job. She was totally set up to take a hit, straw man kind of situation, take the blame, scapegoat. And coincidentally, this rich guy's niece has gone missing, and his lawyer says Jet had a video go viral because she had a news station, a panel show, and it broke into a fight, a big fight, an audience, everybody fighting. And so the lawyer sees that for the rich guy, and he goes, "No, here's somebody else who might. She's an investigative reporter." And the rich guy is like, "Yeah, that's perfect for this family. Let's get her." And that's how those two end up working together to solve the mystery of Tiffany Lynn is missing. Right, that's his niece who went missing. So they develop a romantic interest that carries over into the second book. In the second book, it's much more her adventure because his sister's trying to take down his company. So he's not super present. He's in the second book, but he's not super present. But when they talk to each other on the phone, there's a lot of the babe back and forth, a lot of love talk. When she checks her messages, she's all excited that he called because they're still in that stage of their relationship, and vice versa. He's leaving messages about I really miss you. I should come out there. I need a break. Maybe I'll stop in. Um, and then the end scene, they're together and they're very lovey-dovey. So it begs the question then. It doesn't beg the question, but of course, I have to make them break up in the third book. So that's what's going to happen. His sister's going to take his company down. He's probably going to go to jail. And he's thinking he's getting ready to buy a ring to propose. Instead, he ends up breaking up with her because he loves her too much to put her through the next year or two of hell that he's going to be going through. He's potentially going to lose his fortune. He's going to go to jail. And he loves her too much to do that to her. Of course, on her side, she's like, "You're lying. Why are you doing this? What's really happening?" And she would go through it all with him because she loves him. So it's that gift of the magi thing, right? So that's going to be a subplot in the next book, which is I'm going to break them up for that reason. Now, in the book after that, will they get back together or will they stay apart? Because it was fun getting them together in the first book. And, sometimes you break up and you stay broken up. Now, just between you and me, My goal was to break them up in the third book and get them back together in the fourth book. But I don't have to do that. I don't have to.
Yeah.
He's kind of a character I'm not sure I need anymore. So maybe, you know.
His fate is undecided.
Well, if I think about it, it's like there was going to be a book where it was like a courtroom drama of him dealing with the sister trying to take the company down. They're suing each other and stuff. And Jet is a former lawyer, so that gives her a reason to be around, and we can have kind of that courtroom drama esque underpinning of the fourth book. That's kind of how it is in my head. I haven't written that one. I haven't outlined it, and I've only partly outlined the third book. You were asking about outlining. I started writing it as I was still kind of outlining it. So I've written like 3 different first chapters. And there's a good reason to outline first, you know. You only write one chapter one.
So let me ask you this, because you do have a series and you've got, returning characters. I have been trying to, and I don't know how successful I'm going to be with my next book, but I've been trying to write each book, even though it's a series and it's the same characters, somewhat like a standalone, so that if someone was to accidentally pick up book 3, before they pick up 1 and 2, not everything would be ruined in the prior books. How much do you, after, because now you are more than 3 books into your series, I mean, you've got, how much of a recap do you give in your books without, but then you also want to, or whatever, and I'm sorry, it's a long question, leave little breadcrumbs so that, or not breadcrumbs, goose eggs, not goose, is it goose eggs? Easter eggs. So that people that have been following the series are like, oh, I remember that, or oh, that makes sense, but
So
it doesn't
a lot of
ruin
closures
everything.
there. All right. So
Yeah.
first things first, right? When I wrote the Gamma sequence, that was the first series I started writing. When it was done, it was done. It was over. There was not a book 2. But as you're writing a book, you're thinking about, well, like I said, I collect some ideas. I'm like, well, I can't really use that. I just set it aside. But I'm not thinking about book 2 of this, just like maybe that'll be a fun idea. Well, the Gamma sequence did pretty well. So I was like, okay, if I'm going to write a second book, kind of like they killed the bad guy, where does it go? And I was like, well, just he ran an illegal genetics lab. So I was like, well, he's a rich guy. Maybe he had more than one site. Maybe he had them in other countries. I'm like, okay, there gives you, oh, I killed you, but here comes your brother, oh, we didn't know he had a brother. So I was like, I'm only going to do it if I can do it better than the first one. I really do think, and I brought in a second character for the second one, Jaden Trin, who is now, starts out, everything he was a PI, everything the PI is trying to do, Hamilton Deshear, this woman keeps popping up and screwing it up for him, and the truck blows up and all kinds of things. She punches him and walks away. He's like, who is this woman? Well, come to find out, they're going to end up working together because she's CIA and he has no idea that the stuff he's looking into has anything to do with the CIA. And she's just like, get out of here. You're ruining my thing. She's undercover working with the bad guys. But you don't know that for probably a third or half the book. Finally, she kidnaps him. He's about to get killed and she kidnaps him. He's like, he figures you're the one trying to kill me, and it's not. She's been kind of getting him out of the way of stuff on a bigger scale that was about to get him in trouble. So Easter eggs wise, not really any in the first book because there wasn't, but he had a good friend who Easter egg, that best friend of his in the first book is a secondary character in a different series, the Double Blind series, and that character periodically they call or talk or whatever. And then from there, now you're saying, okay, in book 2, this character is going to go on for a while. These are going to die. And they end up, by the end, him and Hamilton Deshear and Jaden Trin basically get together. There's a young girl who comes into the story who they kind of end up adopting. So over the course of 5 books, there's a giant arc that happens there. So there's that, right?
Right.
So now knowing that I'm going to do something in book 5, I can hint about it in book 4 or book 3, but it can come to fruition or not, because you're kind of throwing out some red herrings anyway, right? Yeah. So all my books have some interrelationship like that way, like this guy's in this book, Andy's in this one, but he's not a super important player in either one. It's just neat for me. Like I need another cop in Tampa. Why don't I just have it be this one who I already created? All right, now going to your question about the backstory. So when I started the second book, I didn't want to have to recap the first book at all. And I know people can walk into a TV show after it's been on for 15 minutes and say, oh, well, this one's the good guy, that's the bad guy. These two have the hots for each other. Okay, and you get up to speed pretty quick. So I said, assume the reader is smart, only have the minimum necessary. And so I looked at the J.K. Rowling books, and in the second book, she did very, very little recapping. And I thought this is perfect because if you read from book 1 to book 2 in the Harry Potter series, like immediately finish book 1 and start book 2, there's not so much where you're like, oh, I know all this. And there's enough where if you didn't read the first book, you get up to speed, but not so much where if you just finished the first book, you're like, I don't need this. So she did a really good job of that. And most of that recap stuff is not necessary. You understand if you start with book 2, something happened in book 1 and you weren't here for it. But we're all going to act like you were. And so we're going to interact. Like if I call you JC all the time and you have a name, that immediately lets you know, or your friends or your family know, he only knows her from where she's JC. He doesn't know her as this. By the same token, if I call you, well, let's suppose your name is Jessica and I call you Jess, but you're professional JC. And I'm like, well, Jess, then they also know, oh, he's friends with her because he's not calling her by her professional name and he's not calling her by her formal name. And if you called me Danny, we would know that that name doesn't appear anywhere, but my family might call me that. Yeah. Some of my family members, right? So there's subtle ways you can drop those things in that get the reader up to speed very quickly, right? Or if there's just a lot of different ways to do it subtly, and the reader gets it. It's like, oh, they must have worked together for a while if they call each other by those kinds of names, right?
Familiarity, yeah.
So I try to do the least amount because I know as a reader, I don't want to read the recap of book 1 and book 2.
Yeah.
I try not to do it at all.
I love Jim Butcher's sci-fi, or not sci-fi, well, it's paranormal fantasy / mystery. But I mean, he's got out. I mean, the series is going on forever, and I don't want it to ever end. But because I've read them, as the latest book comes out, I'm like you said, I'm kind of like, I know this. But there also are times that I'm like, oh, I forgot about that. So It's kind of a catch-22 because these books are so intricate. I can't even say the word. They've got so much going on that
there's a lot of them. You may feel you need to do it.
Yeah.
Think about this. You said you're a Star Wars fan. In the beginning of every one of those movies, they had that long scrolling text to get you up to speed. How long does it take? 60 seconds? I got 60 seconds, But it's a very, very, it's a 20,000 foot view of here's what you missed.
Yeah.
Okay, and it doesn't take long. So there's your balance. Some people do it more than others. There was one author that somebody mentioned where there's the whole first chapter of the next book is recap everything so far. And think about this with TV shows. Who used to do it? Hill Street Blues. Remember that old one? Everybody does it. The first time I ever saw it was with Hill Street Blues. They would say, previously on Hill Street Blues. And they would have a few highlights so you know what the heck was going on for the episode you're about to see.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I thought, now the reason I mentioned Hill Street Blues is that's the first time I ever saw anything do that, right? Other places do it all the time. If you watch Yellowstone, they do that. But the first time I ever saw it was with Hill Street Blues reruns. And Netflix series will a lot of times give you, here's 60 seconds of what you didn't see in the 10 prior episodes if you're just coming now. But it's also to refresh because, oh, yeah, I forgot. This one and that one had a thing, right?
Yeah.
So it's helpful. So, again, my message would be the smallest amount to do the job.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a scene where, my park ranger, he gets a phone call from his little sidekick ranger, and he immediately has not a flashback by any means, but it's it kind of puts him into that spot of what happened to him prior. Once again, no spoilers. It's really difficult to talk about this without spoilers. But it's enough that for those that have read the first and second book, they're in on it. They know why this bit of information might be a little disturbing to him. And so that's what I meant by an Easter egg, not a goose egg.
So here's another one. In the Jet Factor books, and again, it's not really a spoiler, it's an interesting aspect of her character. She accidentally killed her brother when she was about 10. Okay. So in the first book, his name is James. Her name is Jessica, but she doesn't go by that. She goes by Jet. So again, people who call her Jessica or Jessie or Jess, there are people who know her from different things because that's not a professional name. So in the first book, she has this little flashback where her grandma is taking pictures, and her grandma was a big shutterbug, and so she loved her grandma, so she was always used to the camera, which is why when she sits down in front of a camera as a newscaster, it's comfortable for her because it reminds her of her grandma, right? So you get that. The other thing she says is she didn't think about James every day, but just about. And there's a somber moment there that's in book one. You have no idea. James is her brother. That's all you get, and that there's a somberness to it. In book two, she's getting drunk with the park ranger, and just because they're working together and they're having a drink afterwards, yeah. Not drunk, but they're relaxing. She lets her guard down, and she tells about, the ranger asks some kind of a question, and she goes, well, it's like my brother James. We were playing. We were on the swim team. My dad used to help out with swim meets. We had a starter pistol, and it wasn't now where they have the end sealed off, and we had these blanks. But we found out we were playing Russian roulette. Spin the gun, I pick it up, put it in my head, but my ear was ringing, which is why she can't hear too good at that one ear, which you also find out in the first book, but you don't know why. And so the brother goes, each of them did it, and like, well, that's crazy. Her ear's still ringing. She's like, we can't do that. That's too bad, right? He goes, we're going to go deaf. And he goes, well, let's do this. We'll spin it, and whoever's thing it is, so you and I are playing, I spin, it points at you. So I'm going to pick it up and fire it at you so it's not right next to your ear. And it's one bullet in there, so it's either going to click or you die. That's the Russian roulette game. Yeah. What happened was there had been a swim meet. When he went to get the gun out of his dad's closet, there weren't very many blanks, so he grabbed the next box of shells too. He just thought they were bigger blanks, and they weren't. And so when she pulled the trigger, she shot her brother in the chest, her older brother, and he died. And he died right there. The mom comes downstairs, and she watches. She's on the phone calling 911 because her mom sent her inside to call 911. She's looking out the kitchen window, watching him bleed out all over his mother, their mother. And there was something even worse than that about it that I brought up. I can't remember what the heck it was. Oh! Here's how it's worse, which is better but worse. When they moved to a new neighborhood, she was shy, so he took her around to meet all the neighbors and said, "Hey, do you have any kids? Bring them out so they can play with my sister." That's who she killed, not just a jerk older brother, but like he was so good to her, and she killed him. So she's having the glass of wine, and she's like, "This is what happened to me." So there's this little bit of James in the first book, and then this huge reveal, and it's like Jet's got issues. Maybe that's why she's a certain way and does certain things, but it's a big reveal to me, a big reveal in the second book. And like, there's more to this lady than we know. And maybe that's why she's so concerned about the kid across the hall and other
right. Things. It all ties together. Yeah.
So well, I want read the whole book and not have that, or read the whole book and know it in advance. The book's not about that, but it's a neat thing set up in book one, very small. But in book two, you'll remember, oh yeah, grandma with the lens and James. Oh yeah, James. Here's what happened with James. And she'll have one or two things where it's like, reminds me of James. It's like, well, what with James? What's with this James stuff? Here's what's with James,
Nice. Yeah, I actually started reading your first book. So I only got like a couple, I think not even, maybe like, I have so many on my TBR list, but I did pick it up and started reading it. So you can't tell me too much more.
Up and you set it back down, then I failed.
No. I have a full-time, unfortunately, I didn't say that in case work is watching. I love my job, love my coworkers. But I do have a limited amount of reading time compared to my working time and writing time and family time. And, so I was trying to average one book a year, and I was doing really good with the first two.
Right.
Yeah. And then the third book, my mom, unfortunately, she had went in for regular back surgery, and they discovered she was leaking spinal fluid, and had lost so much that her brain sunk in her skull because there was nothing to keep it afloat, and all the blood vessels at the base of her brain broke. And so I think I'm going to try to fit that into one of my stories in the future.
Yeah, good. That's unusual information there.
Yeah. Oh, very. Yeah. It's like 1 in 30 as in the whole entire world has had that happen to them. And so they, once they figured out what was going on, they rushed her over to Seattle by helicopter. And it was COVID, so we couldn't follow behind in a car. And we got a phone call saying, you know, she's never going to walk, she's never going to talk, she's going to have a nurse 24/7, the feeding tube. I mean, the worst case scenario. And how do you want to have her last? You know, how do you want us to make her comfortable? You know, do you want to pull the plug? And I'm going to get religious for a second. In moments like that, you pray, and you ask God for help. And as they're telling us all these terrible, absolutely terrible things that are going to happen, I kept hearing, but she's a fighter. But she's a fighter. And my mom's a very determined woman. But we had, as a family, came together and we made the decision to pull the plug. And my soul was just like, but she's a fighter. Well, then the doctor called back to get our answer because he was giving us a moment to convene. And he said, we just got some x-rays from our machine. And things are still dire and terrible. And all of these things that I just told you might still happen. But I'm thinking we've got a better chance than I thought. Do you want? And I'm like, yes, she's a fighter. Do the surgery. They did. My mom is walking, talking, standing, cleaning her house, doing her gardening.
Awesome.
She is virtually back to 100% normal, and praise God for it, because I totally believe it was his doing. But I tell you, that takes a lot of stress and strain, and it just sucks. I'm an emotional person in general, if you can't tell by all my hand motions.
Something like that will drain your energy in ways you didn't think were possible. And you still have to go about your regular job, taking care of putting groceries and all life else, all the rest of life's requirements still need your attention, as well as that huge thing weighing on you. And, and the biggest part, the uncertainty, right? Absolutely. Is she going to die? Is she going to be okay? That makes the burden 10 times worse.
Well, and not only is she going to live and die, is she going to, because it's a brain injury, be my mother? And, you know, there were times when I would go visit her in the hospital, and now I can sit back and say, I can use this in a book. Now I can be like, this is going to be really good stuff. At the time, it was not fun at all. Yeah. But my mom looked at me like she was looking through glass. There was she was not there. She didn't know who I was. And it was moments like that. So to see her slowly start to come back to life and be my mom, and even her memories coming back, I'll be like, Mom, do you know where something's at? And she'll be like, it's upstairs in the closet on the third shelf underneath the red folder. And there it is. I mean, it's just an absolute miracle. And my mom's got a really fun, bubbly personality. I'm going to take her posy shopping today for Mother's Day. But that kind of experience changes you as a person. But like you said, it was draining. And all of my creative energy I couldn't do it. I couldn't sit down. I couldn't focus on it. I couldn't think on it. And so then when everything was okay, mom's okay, life's back to normal, work's back to normal, COVID's finally come down to a minimal roar. Now it just is flooding out of me. And so I was finally able to sit down and get it all out. And now I'm exhausted because it's out, it's over, the book has been spoken, it's come to life. And now it's in the hands of the beta readers, and, you know, but
Well, you're right. There's a big emotional ride with your book, a big emotional ride with your mother's situation there. And what I always found is the day-to-day not knowing, so much uncertainty over something so important, somebody who's so important to you. It's it affects you in ways that you are completely unaware of. And I only know this because you see some other people go through it, and then say, again, this is not the same. My wife's grandmother, the grandfather was kind of dying, and for like a year or so she was just miserable to be around, and then when he died she was like so good to be around. And it sounds terrible, but it's like the burden was taken off of her finally. We wanted him to not die, but once he did die, the burden and the stress of, when is this going to happen, what else do I need to do, is it going to be tonight, is this my last time with him, all those things that are constant, nonstop. it occupies so much of your thinking, it clouds every single thing that's going on your whole day. You don't really have a creative output. You don't have the energy for creative output. And if you did, you would very likely write something that was so dark and sad that it wouldn't necessarily be what you thought it was when you were able to read it later,
Yeah.
right?
Now, see, my in the middle of book 2, my father, who's my best friend, he passed away, and so I ended up finishing book 2, and it was therapeutic. I mean, I had my mourning period where, I mean, I couldn't, like I said, look at a piece of it, but once I got there, it was so therapeutic to get my emotions out on that book. And luckily, because you're writing a murder mystery, I can go a little dark. I can go a little a little off the rails, but not too much.
Well,
But yeah.
you can paint it in where a character is experiencing that pain that you were experiencing, and doesn't matter which character it is. You can have some of that in a character, and it makes sense, and it's a way for you to get it out. But also, it's not like readers don't ever have bad things happen to them.
Right.
So there's a benefit to reading something like that because that's part of who that particular character was in this story.
Yeah. 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 I think I being able to write is a surviving tactic for me.
And for a lot of people too.
Yeah.
I heard,
Yeah.
I like to listen to podcasts of comedians, and almost always one comedian will say, all the comedians I know are all screwed up in some way, shape, or form. Sometimes they say they are too, but sometimes they don't. And I'm like, if every comedian always says every comedian they know is screwed up, doesn't it mean they're all screwed up? And that's probably why they had to be comedians. And it's kind of the same with authors. It's like, isn't there something, if all authors have to get their emotions out certain ways, then doesn't it mean they're kind of screwed up in that way, maybe, or whatever it is?
Who knows? Too funny.
I don't know. Maybe there could be something to it. It's like, I don't know.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a question. So how many author friends do you feel like you have now? Not like somebody who will chip in and give you a pointer here and there, but like somebody you feel like you can talk to about story development or ideas, or just even not story stuff. Like people who are authors, maybe you met because you're authors, but who you can talk to about a bunch of things with.
So I have recently discovered this lovely thing called a Discord chat group. I was invited by my spicy writer girls, and it is such a community in there that people are feeding stuff off of each other. And so I've only been on. So okay, I guess to answer your question, before TikTok, I had no other writing friends. I was kind of on my own little island, and I had friends that read my book, but none of them were writers themselves. Since joining TikTok in August, which I fought tooth and nail, I had no interest in being on TikTok. My friend Heather, I love her to pieces. She was always showing me funny videos, and you need to do this. And finally, I just joined for the funny videos, and then I discovered Book Talk, and that's all my feed is now, is just Book Talk. In fact, I need to make a second TikTok so I can go back to my crafting and clean talk and all the other stuff. Anyway, so now I would say that I have I call them my wild bunch. They're my spicy girls, but they write more than just spice. They've got some mystery and some suspense and stuff. And so I feel like if I was to hit them up and be like, would you mind reading this, that they would. There's also she's called Mama Mouse. She writes all sorts of stuff, paranormal things, and I feel like we've been able to build a relationship where I can bounce stuff off of her. And so it's nice to have other writers read your work and see it through their perspective. And even having a mystery writer read it is cool. Having someone that's not a mystery writer read it and be like, it's not my thing, but I actually enjoyed this, is also, I think, very complimentary as well. So I'm hoping to get more.
Yeah, I think it's helpful for an author to have that community, and authors tend to be that way. Whether it's reading your stuff or helping you out that way, or just somebody who knows what you're going through because you finished a book and now you're like, all right, big emotional thing, it's over. Start thinking about my next project. Uh, it's always helpful to have some people who know what that's like. So
Yeah.
with me, I was blogging. We created this horror anthologies. I was in critique groups where I had maybe 5 really close author friends. we just get on and just on Facebook Messenger and just talk about whatever. A lot of times it was just goofing off, but it was cool because they were author people who kind of understood the deal. And then a lot of times, because we were friendly on various levels, all through the internet, right? Or primarily, then it was like, it was great to be able to say, hey, look, read this chapter. Here's what I'm trying to accomplish in this scene. Does it get accomplished, you know? And so when I went, where I had like my 5 core critique partners, then after a while it was like 1 or 2, and then after a while it was like they were in my ear. I didn't, even if they didn't read my stuff, I knew as I was writing it or as I was rereading it, so and so would say this about this or that about that, and I knew how to tweak it from working with them for all that time. And so I kind of evolved away. You know, people drift away in this business. I kind of evolved away from it. And I really wanted to use TikTok for 2 reasons: to connect with readers, because they're the end user, right? Mm-hmm. And find out, how do I make TikToks that appeal to the readers? Because I know how to appeal to the authors. You just talk, here's how you do such and such for a book. You'll get 10 million authors. But I also wanted to create the authors, the interaction, like when we started the conversation about who you are behind the page. Because now we've talked for 2 hours. Now I feel like I can ask you questions, and you've always felt, oh, here's a guy who maybe knows something about this, that I don't know. And that's always the case, because things in this business change a lot. Social media, right? So having authors are that way, I've always found. They're very supportive that way. And like I said, when I had to write an action mystery, there was still a sub layer of romance. So I would take it to my romance people and say, how's this romance work? This seems, particularly where they're being romantic, it needs to read as smooth as anything else in the story. And so I would lean on my romance writers, like, hey, help me. And we would rewrite it together until, like, yeah, this is how that should go. It's like, good. Now when I plug it back in over here, it's part of the whole, but it's written well for a romance scene. So it'll all flow. There won't be sticking out in like a sore thumb. And that was important to me. So I feel like I had a bunch, and then I kind of drifted to where I got none, almost none. And now I'm like, that's something and COVID took away part of that too, because there would be in person groups and stuff that they didn't meet. And I prefer online anyway, just because it's usually faster. But that's something I look to reestablish. If I was looking for anything this year, author wise, that I need to do, it's like I missed that aspect of it. The working with other authors, not working with them, but interacting with them, say.
Yeah. Well, and that's the neat thing, though, about book talk is, like you said earlier, you want to reach your readers, and because you've got your authors, but you want to reach your readers. So like Facebook, I have a couple of groups that I belong to, but they're all readers, and which is a bad thing, but then you're kind of like, you learn so much from other authors. I mean, like I said, I've really enjoyed your lives and the benefits, and you're very giving in your information. I appreciate that for us newbies. But book talk, you've got such a great combination of both. It's fun to watch the author TikToks when you see people struggling. Like, I've been staring at this paragraph for an hour, and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm not the only one that does that. And then you have reviewers that just absolutely make your day when they post their little video about how they read your book and they loved it and they liked it, and you're just like, that is the best. That is the best. And I want more of those, just so anyone's listening. But that's why it's such a neat. There's a lot of I don't know if a lot of readers would find the writers, and the writers would find the readers without book talk.
I think it's interesting that the readers want to have a peek behind the page. Mm-hmm. And the authors want to know what the readers are thinking, so they can deliver a quality product to them, right? So that interaction. But I think prior to certain social media existing, there really wasn't a way to do it. Like, you might read it as an interested reader, you might find an article on, say, Stephen King or J.K. Rowling or Colleen Hoover, and that was your source. That was it, limited to whatever, and there would not be a lot of those. Now you can go, maybe your favorite authors on a podcast where they're giving their thoughts once a week or every day or whatever the heck it is, right? So now the access is the potential access is there. Does each side who wants to have that access know it exists, right? So there becomes the challenge. So as I started with our conversation, I have no problem. Whatever I learn, I'm happy to share, right? Because Lance Armstrong, maybe not Lance Armstrong, say Tiger Woods, golf pro, can tell me all kinds of things about being a golf pro, how to hit the ball. Doesn't mean I'm going to be able to do it. So there's zero fear. And if I can help somebody become better, the more good authors I have, that I'm interacting with, the better author I'm going to be, because we're all going to rise together. There's no reason to not meet your audience, to have your audience meet my audience. We both benefit. So I'm big on that, and I've always been that way when it comes to being an author. But it's nice to have that message reinforced through other areas, like podcasters who say, when this guy comes on mine, his audience comes here, my audience maybe goes to him. We all grow. I'm like,
Yeah.
awesome. That's what we all want.
Yeah. Well, and there's something to be said in knowing that, the stuff that I've learned from you, a lot of the things that you say that I've asked questions, you give an answer, and I'm like, okay, I do that too. Okay, this is good. I'm on the right track.
My first one of those was James Patterson. I would listen to people way back when I was in a critique group. Oh, I got this far into my story and I don't know where to go. I'm like, well, what was your plan when you thought of this magical character, this wizard boy who didn't know he was a wizard? When you think about it, where does that story go? How does it end? Does he die? If he dies, there's your ending, right? And it's like, you don't have to outline every single thing, but maybe 3 or 4 big points. And so I watched this James Patterson masterclass, and he said the number one reason, in his opinion, the number one reason for writer's block was they didn't think about the story enough before they started writing it. Everybody comes with all that energy to start writing, and then after 10,000 words, it's like, well, it's kind of turning into work now. It's not as much fun. I don't have the energy. And he goes, if you'd spend another day or two figuring out those things first, now each day you're sitting down with a writing prompt, and guess what? If you don't want to write that day's writing prompt, what makes you think anybody's going to want to read that? So, I looked at that as like, oh my gosh, it was like $100 something bucks. I don't feel like I learned very many things out of it, but the things that I believed already that were reinforced by him, that right there was worth the price of admission. Because
right there, yep.
I'm not the only one who thinks that. And so now I'm like, I did the other day, I did this math calculation. I'm like, suppose you can type 60 words a minute. Then if you give yourself an hour, that's 3,600 words. That's a chapter. Why can't you write 8 chapters in a day? It's like, because 90% of writing is thinking.
Yeah.
This part is the easy part. This part is the hard part. And guess what? The brakes fail, or the dishwasher breaks, or the kid's sick. There's all kinds of life that interferes on your ability to think creatively. Your case in point with your mother. You'll be superwoman if you could write a book that was creative and upbeat and all blah blah blah, and good to read and fast paced, and deal with all that at the same time.
Right.
Probably beyond anybody's capabilities.
Yeah.
So
unfortunately, my cape was at the dry cleaners, so that didn't happen.
Yeah, that's how that works. Well, listen, we should probably wrap this up. We've been going on for 2 hours. I could probably talk to you for 2 more, but I'm gonna make an offer to you. Okay. I don't know about you, but I would love to do this again sometime.
Yes.
And not so much because you asked me so many questions, like, oh, I'm getting interviewed on my own show, great, but because part of like we were talking about, it camaraderie. You are a very upbeat person, and you're fun to talk to. You bring a lot of energy to the conversation, and because authoring can be an isolating business. Now, for me, I've learned to work with it, so I can sit in here for days and days and days and not talk to a human being. But I like to do a podcast and TikTok live and TikTok videos and stuff. Some are about how to write, but most I'm hoping are just being fun and silly and entertaining. So I would love to do this again, maybe even make this a regular thing, because I think the more we do this type of thing, the more the audience is going to come and find that, hey, they talk a little behind the scenes, a little how-to, a little other things, and I think that's part of what is going to be interesting in the big picture for stuff like this.
Well, I'm honored because this is only my 3rd live, so I must not have been terrible at it. So.
Well, you said the first one you did, you just sat there, and I was like, well, when I tuned in, that is kind of what you're doing. I'm like, well, that's not going to happen on this one, just because I won't let you, but because you had questions you wanted to ask, and I knew that would happen anyway, because when I had done live sessions, you were asking a lot of good questions. So, and again, not to have this be the school of Dan teaches JC how to write, but to have 2 authors talking a little bit about the process, a little about behind the person who's actually doing this stuff. One of
Yeah.
my people made a comment. They're like, they only see the finished product. They like to have an idea of how does it come together, like we were talking about that airport
Yeah.
scene and things like that. It's like, oh, cool. And then to read that one day and say, I remember when he was talking about this. This is kind of neat, you know?
Well, and then to also realize too that authors put a lot of their heart and soul into these words, and it's a lot of work. You sometimes you look at a painting and you're like, oh, the artist was just sat there and just did this and that, and they're like, they're covered in paint, they've got oil, lead poisoning. I mean, there's all these things that can happen because it's love, it's artwork. So it's kind of neat to peek behind the
Yeah,
thing.
the Robert Frost quote, no tears in the writer, no tears in the reader. I'm like, okay, that's kind of how I did it anyway. Good to see somebody validating what I believe, and I
Yeah.
believe that. I may not always be able to deliver it, but trust me. And when if you're laughing, it's because I wanted you to laugh. If you're on the edge of your seat, it's because that's what I wanted. And if you're somber or sad, misting up a little bit, trust me, I was over here, tears running down my face into the keyboard when I was writing it, because that's the number. I probably told you this before. That's the number one thing that newer authors don't do. They don't put enough real emotion in there. They get scared. Oh, my mom might read this. She might read it, and so might 50,000 people. That's the bravery of. If there's bravery in
Yeah.
writing, that's where it is. It's putting that, opening yourself up, and exposing yourself, and saying, "Here it is." Not just that I wrote this thing when you read it, but emotion. And then they read it and they say, "Wow, it's powerful stuff." Inevitably, when I opened up emotionally and put it on the page and worked hard to capture it, the readers would connect. And this is kind of an ethereal thought. I believe it's not like the words carried magic with them, but I believe we write in a different cadence. We choose different words when we're being emotional, and that part carries through, right?
Yeah.
And
Yep.
so it's effective. It's important, and it makes the reading better. And it's scarier to do, but if you do it well. It's so the payoff is so huge, and
Yeah.
it allows you to grow and do more and be even better.
Yep. That's the
All righty, man. Well,
goal.
listen, we good? Did you,
Yes.
would you like to come back again sometime? Because I would love to
Absolutely,
have you.
Dan. Thank you. Yes, I had a blast. This is fun.
I had a great time. When I looked up, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's been 2 hours. I had no idea it had gone by that
Yeah.
fast. So,
My mom's probably like, where are you? We're going
I
flower
remember that
shopping.
too. I'm like, the shopping you're supposed to be doing. I'm like, well, maybe mom canceled. So listen, JC, this was great. I'll catch you on the direct message thing and tell you some other things about how to do this again sometime. I'd love to do that. Meanwhile, to everybody else, um, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll talk again soon.
All right. Bye. Thanks, everybody. How do I turn it off?